Hello everybody, I am the British Bookworm. My name is actually Gavin and I'm reviewing a book, nice and thin, very quick read, that is an easy one to read in relation to the New Testament or Gospels. Can We Trust the Gospels by Peter J. Williams. This is a really sweet little book. It's one of those little gems of a book that when you read, it will have a profound impact on you if you didn't know the subject matter. So I've admittedly read this book last year, so it's not a recent read because I've read so many books. In order for me to do them justice, I'm going to have to go back and kind of scan them. But I'm doing this review kind of on the top of my head. The book that I'm holding is a precious book because it's got information in it that a lot of Christians are unaware of, but also the vast majority of the population, sounds so obvious what I'm saying really, doesn't it? The vast majority of the population don't have access to it. On the contrary, the educational level of the Bible is really truly shocking over the vast majority of people, mainstream media and television, YouTubers, atheists, people that attack the idea not only of a God but also the authenticity of the Gospels. When I was growing up, I had Muslims attack the authenticity without any comeback because at that time there was no internet, and so they could get away with saying things that their imams have been telling them, and them finding Christian brothers or friends and basically saying things that were just blatant, utter lies. I'm going to say that to you again. The things that they were saying, that other Muslims would go to Christian brothers and say, well, does it not, what about this, what about this? And they were blatant and utter lies, and they are lies, which is just, I'm going to say it, they are lies. Now, one of the main ones was the authenticity of the Gospels. Not only do Muslims preach this in massive amounts, it's one of the prerequisites in apologetics that they have, then also atheists and people who get glimpses of these bits of information from mainstream TV or famous atheists like Dawkins, and they say certain things and then that's it becomes a truth and everyone goes out there saying these things. So can we trust the Gospels? The answer to that is yes, we can. And this little gem of a book goes into the actual historical basis on why the Gospels are trustworthy, why mainstream, like 98-99% of mainstream scholarly historians who aren't necessarily religious acknowledge that not only are they trustworthy in the sense that they are what they are genuinely believing in what they're claiming to be, but they're authentic as well, and that they are tied to writers and authors that we do know. So there's a few lies and misconceptions. I'm just wanting to review the book, right? But what you can take from it is, we know who wrote the Gospels. So if someone tells you that we don't know who writes the Gospels or have wrote the Gospels, then they are lying, okay? Or they are uneducated, or they haven't gone deeper enough into the subject, or they're just basically preaching or saying something that they believe in because they want to believe in for their own purposes, or they just believe it because somebody else has told them it. So we can trust the Gospels because we know who wrote it. The Gospels were written very close to the dates of the time that Jesus walked on the earth. So what does that mean? again, Muslims have been saying this for a very long time, and they got away with saying it because they were never able to, you were never able to fact check things online in the same way, or people were able to challenge those arguments. We didn't have access to the intellect and scholars online that we do now. So, having said that, we have also access to fantastic books like this. In history, the nearer the scholar wrote down on the subject matter to the time of the event, the more accurate and respected it is. So one of the arguments that Muslims, particularly Muslims, I'm not targeting Muslims there, but what I want to say is, the reason why I'm saying that is, as someone who has been around a lot of Muslims, they always say that they were written hundreds of years later. And there are atheists as well, and people who are anti-Christian. A lot of people say it, but it's just actually factually untrue, and it's a lie, and it's one that is extremely grotesque because it it belittles something that is profound and life-changing and doesn't let people come to the truth. And it's the work of the devil ultimately, because if you don't believe that the Gospels can have veracity to them, you won't even come to read them. And that's the key argument. Anyone who says things like, well, they were written hundreds of years after Jesus supposedly walked the earth, you'll see comments like that don't have any sincere intellect behind the processes of the individual. The person has not sat down and intellectually thought about it. I should say to you this as well. I'm coming at this from a person who's been on that side of the fence, or been on that side, just believing blatant things that people would say. And I would even, in off chance of discussing something with a Christian, or if a conversation, not that I haven't had many discussions with Christians over the years, but when I came across a Christian, if it came up, I would be like, well, how do you know who wrote that letter? Do you really know who wrote that letter? Do you really know who the letters, by the way, being the Gospels? Do you know how long they were written after the event? That type of argument. I would say that. So I'm coming at this from a hypocrite point of view. I've been a hypocrite in the sense that I've done what I'm saying to you I don't respect right now. So what you take away, this is going to get a 5 out of 5 because it literally blasts mainstream lies with severely serious, educational, authentic, scholarly, PhD knowledge that you cannot refute. This is a university level scholarly description or prescription to break the narrative that we call it trust the Gospels. If you don't know, I am a Christian, and I am a Christian after 30 years of going backward and forward and coming back with so many arguments against the idea of Christianity. And the arguments, some of them of which I've just said, like you can't trust the Gospels, they were made up and they were this and they were that. They were basically written by Constantine, it was Paul who made it all up. The level of argument against Christianity, when you actually look at it properly, are truly atrocious and uneducated and deceitful and really quite evil, to be quite honest with you. Because the ammunition against Christianity is absolutely huge, and unfortunately it's done very subliminally from mainstream TV shows, movies, documentaries that attack the authenticity because it gets views, because people like moving away from the idea that there is a God that we are accountable to. So why can we trust the Gospels? What does this book try to articulate as an argument that the Gospels are not only trustworthy, but they are sincere in what they're saying? So Gospels were letters, which I did, the first 5 or 6 are quite long. So the idea that they are letters is a bit strange to a modern day person, and that's something that you need to put to the side and hold for a moment. The letters are long letters, and that in itself is extremely significant, because for people to write letters of 5,000 words of those times, that said a lot about the authenticity of the letter, because not everybody wrote or were able to write. So when people sat down and wrote 5,000 word letters, there was a massively important significance to using parchment and ink and dyes in order to, and then spend hours and hours and hours writing those letters down. You've got to think that the person doing that had to believe what they were doing. So that's one of the arguments. The other argument is that when you analyze on a scholarly level the New Testaments, so the first argument is the size of the letters actually have an authenticity to them because of the way that letters were seen in the time. The second thing is that when we look at the Gospels, we have to understand that their way of looking at things was different to how we look at things. So the letters were like newsletters, they were like a newspaper of the time. So obviously there was only so much parchment or so much resources to get information out there at those times. So to write on a subject with 5,000 letters was extremely significant, and most letters of the ancient times were like 200 or 500 letters. So letters of massive size show that the subject matter was extremely significant and important for the period of time. The second one, or second example, are names. So we know now through archaeology and historic research that the Gospels use the names of the period of time that they were written in. Now, that might not sound as significant as it actually is. So if, for example, we go through a phase of using certain names for babies because of people in celebrity are using those names, then we can, in the future, if we didn't have devices and technology to record that, we could use the fact that there was a period of time on the birth record when certain names were more popular. So we can actually read the Gospels and understand certain names like Mary and Matthew and Paul and other names, other more sort of off names like Barabbas or things like that, names like that, sorry. We can then put them to a time period based on archaeology and other resources of historical documentation, and so they can attach that to the period of time that Jesus was alive. So that's another argument. The third argument is places. Okay, so the Gnostic Gospels, which by the way have been totally debunked in scholarly circles on a serious level, of which you can't come back with an argument unless you yourself can present a counter argument on the scholar level. So the Gnostic Gospels, their main one of their problems were they were written by people who were obviously not in the region that they were claiming to be in. So when you write a book, if you live in Italy and you've never been to Israel or Jerusalem, you are using third person point of view as far as you can to describe where this place is. You might be trying to write you've been there, or that you were there as one of Jesus' disciples, let's say, and you try to write about the places that you went or describe certain things. Now, unless you go into the Bible with a fine eye, you don't see these things, but basically it describes certain things which we know were factual, but you would have had to have been there. So, for example, on a basic level, if I go every week to support my football team, I know certain signs that are there on the way, I know certain houses that are there, I know certain people's faces that might go there every weekend, or the stewards on the football pitch. I know in-depth little bits of information that I could not make up unless I went there. So the Gospels are almost the same thing. We have things in them what the Gnostic Gospels didn't have. In fact, the Gnostic Gospels had things that were absolutely fraudulent, categorically fraudulent, or only were relevant 200 years later. So they were far, far, far away from the actual true times of the time they were trying to document. So it's this very same idea for the Bible. So if you didn't live there, you could quite easily make mistakes. It's like me trying to write a book about Canada and write a fictional book about Canada. I can look up online certain truths and facts about the trees that grow there, or about the animals that live in certain regions. I can look up there those facts, but as I'm writing it, if I'm trying to describe it, I have to be very careful to try to come across like someone who's authentically understanding it. Same thing. So there's that. Then there's the historians and non-Christian sources that discuss Jesus, who were anti-Christian, that discuss Jesus nearer or within the time of first 100 years and second 100-year period of time. That is significant, because even the most famous historic figures that we have, a lot of them have had history written about them hundreds and hundreds of years later, that historians accept as actually living people, like Julius Caesar, for example. Figures that we just see, these gigantic figures in history, but there is no questioning. But their literate sources are hundreds of years written later after the person's lived. With the Gospels, we have basic information, basically historical information written 55 to 120 years later, which are very, very, very close to the source. Or when I say 55 years, by the way, I'm actually talking like 20 years after. And there's lots of other things that you should think about in regards to this subject, which I'm not able to communicate as well as I wish I could. But if you wish to know more, I highly recommend this book, because it goes into these subjects a lot more articulate than I can. And it is a travesty that a lot of Christians and people do not understand the amazing nature that the Gospels, as books, as letters, if you like, hold in history. If you do not believe that Jesus is God, the Son of God, that's fine. But do not slay the Bible if you are not willing to do the actual educational, historical research into their authenticity. And I could go on. There is so much proof to the Bibles being not only authentic but written to the times that they claim to be. It's shocking, and it leaves you as a person that is willing to open their minds to these truths that I'm saying are scholarly fact, as much as we can be certain of for something so far back in history, I ask you this: if you are really serious about being open to improving yourself as a person, then being open to knowledge and open to truths have to become relevant to you. So, understanding that we have been brainwashed to see certain things as truth is very important for you as an individual person, because I didn't know any of this, and bit by bit I came to it through some big YouTubers and through different channels on YouTube. When I read this book, it was mind-blowing. Very quick read, but it's mind-blowing. And it's, I don't know, I've already said this, but it's really upsetting and disgusting that the mainstream view is when I excuse me, when I say the mainstream view, by the way, I'm not talking about university scholars. I've just put their point of view in this video. But the mainstream is that the majority of people do not know that the Gospels are incredible letters, books on history. And whether you believe Jesus is God or not, you cannot authentically claim to be truthful and argue against them, because as a historical documented area of history, we have so much to support the Bible being at least an honest interpretation of what went on in the New Testament. And I would highly recommend, if you want to know more, to read this book, to buy it. It's only cheap, so £6 book, Can We Trust the Gospels by Peter J. Williams. It will open up your mind to Christianity. If you are an atheist, or if you're someone who's been brought up and you accept that you've been lied to, potentially you've been lied to over years and years and years about the Gospels, about what Jesus was, about who he was, about the disciples, about the letters of Paul, about who Paul was, then buy this book, read it quickly, and go through the same process that I've been through when I read it. So that's it. What are your thoughts? Are you willing to open up your mind to accept that what you have believed for 10, 20, 30 years as an adult has been wrong or a lie? If so, you are a victim of the ideas that have been imposed upon you as fact when they weren't fact. And one last thing I will say is, in recent times, there are more archaeological findings in Jerusalem and in the regions of the Bible that have supported the Gospels, whereas atheists would like you to believe the opposite. So recent 20 years there have been a lot of archaeological finds which support the Gospels tremendously. For example, the decor of a swimming pool the time Jesus walked the earth. They've found that, everybody. They've found the exact pool that they used to use to cleanse themselves, with the actual biblical description being found 2020 or 2000 years later. The actual pool foundation as described in the Bible. Now that sounds, you can say that sounds like, you know, just a belief, but it's a fact, and there's been many cases. Does that mean you can, you know, that it's 100% true? I'm not saying that. What I am saying is, if you are a bookworm and if you wish to learn and you aren't closed off, then if you're an atheist, you'll buy this book and read it. If you are agnostic, you'll buy this book and read it. And it will give you some elements of a deeper appreciation for something that is dismissed by the mainstream of society that we live in. Just because everybody seems to think something doesn't mean it's true. So that's where I'm going to leave this video. So if you like this video, try and give me a like. I don't like this, I'm not going to do this on any videos, but try and give me a like, subscribe to the video if I've put this video on. Let me know if you're a Christian, what your thoughts are of what I've just said. And if you are not a Christian, give me your thoughts. But don't write stuff down if you are not educated or you are following the exact programming that I've just discussed in this video. Don't waste your time. Right, thank you. See you later.